Apache woman tied as prey for wolves, Cowboy found her and refused to leave her behind. The cold wind cut through the trees like a sharp knife. The forest was quiet, but not the peaceful kind. It carried a tension, a kind that made every snap of a twig or rustle of leaves feel like a warning. The sun was setting behind the mountains, and the shadows stretched long across the rough ground. In a small clearing, tied to a thick tree trunk, a young Apache woman struggled against the ropes that bound her wrists and ankles. Her brown hair was tangled and dirty, and her clothes were torn from the climb through the forest. Her eyes, however, were fierce, bright with a mix of fear and determination. She had been captured hours ago, or maybe a full day. The exact time did not matter anymore. What mattered was the cold, the hunger, and the growing danger around her. Wolves had been spotted in the area before she was brought here. Her captors had spoken of leaving her behind as prey, a cruel and terrifying plan. She shivered as she realized the truth of their words. The thought of the wolves circling, waiting for her, made her heart pound. She knew she had to survive, not just for herself, but for her family and her people. Giving up was not an option. The ropes dug into her wrists, and she tried twisting her hands, feeling the rough bark of the tree against her fingers. She thought of the river near her village, the clear water she used to drink from as a child. She remembered the soft grass of the plains, the laughter of her friends, and the smell of the fire her mother used to make. Those memories gave her strength. Fear was strong, but her hope was stronger. She whispered to herself, barely moving her lips, "I will not be taken. I will survive." She listened carefully to the sounds around her. The forest was alive with hidden movement. A branch snapped in the distance and she froze. Her breath became shallow. The shadows between the trees seemed to grow taller, darker, and more menacing. She could hear the distant howls of wolves. They were far enough that she felt some relief, but close enough to remind her that danger was very real. Her stomach growled. She had not eaten since the morning, and the thought of food was both comforting and painful. Hunger was one enemy, fear another, and the ropes binding her were the immediate, inescapable challenge. Hours passed slowly. The sky darkened into deep shades of blue and purple, and stars began to appear above the treetops. The forest seemed to change with the night, becoming both more beautiful and more threatening. She thought about the stories her grandmother had told her about spirits in the forest, both kind and cruel. She prayed silently for protection, not sure if any spirit would hear her, but the act of speaking her hope aloud gave her a small measure of comfort. Despite the fear, she refused to give up. She looked around for anything that could help her escape. There were no sharp rocks nearby, no broken branches strong enough to cut the ropes, but she did not despair. She began to study the knots carefully, twisting her wrists just enough to see the way they were tied. Patience, she reminded herself, patience and cleverness. Panic would only waste her energy. She tried to stay quiet, listening to every sound, the rustle of leaves, the distant movement of wolves, the occasional wind blowing through the trees. She imagined herself free, running through the forest with the ropes falling away behind her. She closed her eyes and imagined the river again, feeling the cold water on her hands and face, and it gave her courage. Suddenly, there was a louder noise, a sharp crack of a branch, closer than before. Her heart jumped into her throat and she froze completely. Every muscle in her body tensed. She held her breath, hoping whoever or whatever it was would not come near. Then she heard the soft sound of hooves. Her ears caught the rhythm, steady and calm. Someone was riding nearby, someone careful, moving with knowledge of the forest. She dared to hope. Maybe this was not the end. Maybe help was coming. Her heart quickened, but she forced herself to stay still. The ropes might cut her more if she struggled now. The rider approached cautiously. She could see the shape of a man on horseback moving between the shadows of the trees. He was alone, wearing worn leather clothes and a wide hat that shaded his face. His horse moved silently, carefully avoiding the branches. She could see the outline of a rifle across his back, and the way he looked around showed that he was experienced in the dangers of the wilderness. She did not know if he was friend or foe, but at this moment, she had no choice but to hope he was kind. The man stopped a few feet from her and dismounted slowly. He placed his hand gently on the horse's neck, calming it as he studied her situation. His eyes widened slightly as he took in the sight of the tied woman. He did not rush, did not make a sudden move that could scare her. Instead, he slowly approached, speaking in a calm, quiet voice. "You're safe for now," he said. "I won't let anything happen to you." The Apache woman's chest rose and fell quickly. She could not speak, but her eyes told him everything: fear, relief, and the desperate plea for help. The man knelt down carefully, studying the ropes. He examined the knots with the hands of someone who had untied many things in his life. He worked patiently, pulling at the ropes with gentle force, careful not to hurt her. Each knot came undone one by one, and finally she was free. She rubbed her wrists, looking at him with a mix of gratitude and disbelief. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice shaking. He nodded slightly, acknowledging her words without saying much else. His actions spoke louder than any speech. For a long moment, they just looked at each other. The night around them was quiet again, but the tension of the forest had not completely gone. The wolves were still out there, and the forest was full of hidden dangers. But now, with her free and standing beside a man willing to protect her, the Apache woman felt a spark of hope she had not felt since the capture. She realized that courage could come not just from within, but from unexpected help, from someone who refused to leave her behind when danger surrounded her. The cowboy did not speak much, but his actions showed care and experience. He guided her to a safer part of the forest, away from the immediate area where she had been left. The trees here were thicker, offering cover, and the sounds of distant predators were muffled by the dense underbrush. As they moved slowly, she began to trust him more, observing the way he read the terrain, the way he kept one hand near his weapon while staying calm and reassuring. She began to feel that perhaps, with him, she had a chance to survive the night, to escape not just the wolves but everything that had threatened her life so far. By the time they reached a small clearing where she could rest, the stars were shining brightly above them. The cold night air bit at their faces, but for the first time in hours the Apache woman felt a sense of safety. She was exhausted, hungry and sore from the ropes, but she was alive. And in the wilderness, that was everything. She sat down on the soft grass, leaning slightly against a tree, while the cowboy kept watch nearby. The forest still whispered its threats, but the sense of fear that had dominated her moments ago began to fade. She understood that the night was not over, that more challenges lay ahead, but she also knew that survival was possible, and she had help she could trust. As she closed her eyes for a brief moment, the first feeling of relief in a long time washed over her. She thought about her family, her village, and the life she had almost lost. But now, she also thought about the courage that had kept her alive, the patience she had used to endure, and the unexpected kindness of a stranger who had refused to leave her behind. Somewhere in the forest, under the silent stars, two lives were connected by chance and courage, and the story of survival was only beginning. The first light of dawn barely touched the tips of the trees when the Apache woman opened her eyes. The night had been long, filled with quiet tension. She could still feel the stiffness in her wrists and the soreness of her shoulders from being tied, but the cowboy was still there, standing nearby, keeping watch. He did not speak much, only nodding occasionally, but his presence alone was comforting. She realized that survival was no longer just about herself. She now had to rely on both her courage and the help of this man if they were going to escape the dangers of the wilderness. The forest around them was alive with morning sounds, birds chirping, the rustle of leaves, and the faint trickle of a distant stream. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of pine and damp earth. The Apache woman stretched carefully, her muscles protesting, but she knew that they could not linger here for long. Wolves were still in the area, and there could be other dangers, both human and animal, nearby. The cowboy had already scanned the horizon, his sharp eyes picking out small movements and shapes that she would have missed. It was clear he knew the forest well, and that gave her hope. Without speaking, he gestured for her to follow. She rose, keeping her steps quiet, careful not to disturb the soft earth beneath their feet. The ropes had left marks on her wrists, but she ignored the pain, focusing on the path ahead. They moved slowly at first, through a narrow trail hidden by overhanging branches. The cowboy led the way, constantly scanning for any sign of danger. She noticed how careful he was, not rushing, but moving with a steady, deliberate pace. It gave her confidence that they could survive if she stayed close and followed his lead. The first challenge came as they approached a small creek. The water was cold and clear, rushing over smooth stones. She paused, taking a sip and letting the water refresh her tired body. The cowboy motioned for her to keep moving, pointing to a set of footprints on the muddy bank. He explained silently, with gestures, that they needed to follow the land carefully, avoiding open spaces where they could be spotted. The Apache woman nodded, understanding that survival required patience and observation. As they continued through the forest, the woman began to notice small things about the cowboy. He carried himself with quiet confidence, his movements precise and careful. His eyes constantly scanned the surroundings, not missing even the smallest detail. He seemed calm, yet alert, like someone who had faced danger many times before and learned how to survive it. She felt a growing trust in him, realizing that he was not just a rescuer but a protector. And in the wilderness, trust could be as important as courage. Hours passed as they navigated through thick underbrush and twisted paths. The sun climbed higher and the forest grew warmer, but the threat of predators remained. She could hear birds calling and the distant howl of a wolf, reminding her that they were not completely safe. At one point, a low growl came from behind a bush, and the woman froze. The cowboy immediately raised a hand, signaling her to stay calm. Slowly, he moved forward, parting the branches with his hands, and they saw a small fox emerge and dart away. Both of them relaxed slightly, but the tension remained. The forest could turn dangerous in an instant. By midday, hunger had become a pressing concern. The woman's stomach growled, and she looked at the cowboy with concern. He seemed to understand without words and gestured for her to sit by a large tree while he searched the nearby area. After a few minutes, he returned with some edible roots and a small piece of dried meat. It was not much, but it would keep them going. She ate slowly, savoring the small meal, and felt strength returning to her tired body. The cowboy ate only a little, keeping most of the food for her. The gesture made her heart warm. In a world full of danger, kindness was rare, and she realized how fortunate she was to have someone who cared enough to share what little he had. After resting briefly, they continued their journey. The forest began to change as they climbed a gentle slope. The trees grew taller and more spaced out, allowing more sunlight to reach the forest floor. The path became more difficult, with rocks and fallen branches blocking their way. The woman stumbled a few times, and the cowboy extended a steady hand to help her. She felt a rush of gratitude and silently thanked him, realizing that every step forward was a step toward freedom. As they moved higher, the sounds of the forest changed. Birds sang less frequently, and the wind seemed to carry a colder, sharper note. The woman shivered and pulled her thin jacket tighter around herself. The cowboy noticed and offered her a scarf he carried, which she accepted gratefully. He did not speak, but the small act of care spoke volumes. She began to see him not just as a protector, but as someone who understood the importance of small comforts in the midst of danger. Suddenly, the sound of human voices reached them. The woman froze, her eyes wide with fear. The cowboy held up a hand, signaling her to stay silent. He crouched low and motioned for her to follow as he moved cautiously toward the sound. Peering through the trees, they saw a small group of men moving along a distant trail. They carried rifles and looked alert, scanning the forest for any sign of movement. The cowboy whispered, though she could barely hear him, "We need to move quickly and quietly." They turned away from the men and took a hidden path through a dense thicket. The woman's heart pounded and her breathing became shallow. Every step was tense, every sound magnified in the quiet of the forest. They moved with care, ducking under branches and stepping over roots until the voices faded behind them. She let out a small sigh of relief, realizing how close they had come to danger. The cowboy gave her a reassuring nod, and she felt a renewed sense of trust in his skill and judgment. As the day wore on, they found a small clearing with a shallow stream. The cowboy motioned for her to rest and drink, and she eagerly knelt by the water. She felt a growing sense of hope. Each step they took together was a step away from danger, a step towards safety. She realized that her survival depended not only on her own courage but on their cooperation and trust. Together, they were stronger than the dangers that surrounded them. While she rested, the cowboy kept watch, scanning the horizon and listening for any signs of trouble. She noticed how he adjusted his position to stay alert without appearing tense. He seemed to understand the balance between caution and patience, knowing when to act and when to wait. She admired his skill and experience, realizing that his calm presence was helping her regain her own courage. As evening approached, they needed to find a place to spend the night. The forest was darkening, and the shadows grew longer and more menacing. The cowboy found a small hidden hollow beneath a large tree, offering some protection from the wind and the cold. He gestured for her to stay inside while he made a small fire a safe distance away. The warmth and light of the fire gave them both comfort, but it also reminded them that the forest was still full of dangers they could not see. Sitting by the fire, the woman reflected on the events of the day. She had been captured, left for predators, and faced the terror of the wilderness. Yet she had survived, thanks to her courage and the help of the cowboy. She realized that survival was about more than avoiding danger. It was about staying calm, observing carefully, and trusting those who could help. She had learned that bravery could come in many forms. In her own determination, in the quiet courage of the cowboy, and in the small acts of care that made the journey possible. The cowboy did not speak much that night, but the woman felt his presence as a steady, reassuring force. The fire crackled softly, and the forest seemed to hold its breath. She knew the night would be long and that the journey ahead would be difficult, but she also knew they would face it together. For the first time since her capture, she felt a sense of hope that they could escape the dangers of the wilderness and reach safety. As she closed her eyes that night, she whispered a silent promise to herself. She would survive. She would not let fear or danger defeat her. And she would honor the courage of the man who had refused to leave her behind, who had risked his own safety to save her life. The forest was full of shadows and threats, but it was also a place where courage and trust could create hope. And in that moment, hope burned brighter than any fear. The first light of dawn barely filtered through the thick canopy of trees, but the forest already seemed alive with movement. Birds chirped nervously, squirrels darted between the branches, and the soft rustle of leaves whispered that the wilderness was awake and alert. The Apache woman stretched, shaking off the stiffness in her muscles, her mind still sharp with the memory of the night before. She glanced at the cowboy, who was already on his feet, scanning the forest with careful, deliberate movements. His eyes flicked from tree to tree, checking for danger, and the woman felt reassured. He had saved her once, and now he was ensuring that the day would not bring new threats. The forest ahead was dense, with twisted roots and thick underbrush that slowed every step. The cowboy moved first, carefully testing the ground with his boot before stepping forward, showing her the safest path. The woman followed closely, her heart beating faster with each step. Every sound, the snap of a twig underfoot, the distant call of a bird, reminded her that they were not alone in the wilderness. Wolves had been nearby the day before, and their haunting howls still echoed in her memory. She pushed herself to stay calm, remembering the lessons of patience and observation that had helped her survive so far. As they climbed a small rise, the forest opened slightly, revealing a rocky slope that led to a higher plateau. The path was narrow and dangerous, but the cowboy moved with the confidence of someone who knew the land well. He extended a hand to her, helping her over loose stones and steep edges. She took his hand gratefully, feeling the warmth and steadiness of his guidance. Together, they navigated the tricky terrain, step by step, careful not to make a sound that might alert predators lurking nearby. Halfway up the slope, the woman noticed movement out of the corner of her eye, a shadow slipping silently between the trees. She froze, her heart thundering in her chest. The cowboy stopped immediately, signaling for her to crouch. He moved forward slowly, using the cover of the rocks and bushes, his hands ready on his rifle. The shadow moved again, and she realized it was not a human threat. It was a wolf, watching them with intelligent, cautious eyes. The cowboy did not panic. He knew that sudden movement could provoke the animal, so he waited patiently. The wolf seemed to understand, and after a tense moment it turned and disappeared into the forest. The woman exhaled slowly, her hands trembling slightly. She realized that the wilderness was full of dangers she could not control, but the cowboy's calmness taught her how to face them. She followed him closely as they continued upward, each step bringing them closer to safety, but also testing their courage. The rocky slope became steeper, and the sun rose higher, warming their backs and making the climb exhausting. Sweat ran down her face, but she refused to stop, driven by the hope of freedom and the trust she had in her companion. By midday, they reached the plateau, a wide area with scattered trees and tall grass. The view was breathtaking, with mountains in the distance and the forest stretching endlessly below. But beauty did not erase danger. The plateau was open, and any predators or humans could see them from a distance. The cowboy scanned the horizon, then motioned for the woman to move carefully behind a large boulder. They rested there briefly, catching their breath and taking in the scenery. The woman drank from a small water stream that trickled between the rocks, feeling a spark of life return to her tired body. The cowboy studied the area, pointing to several paths they could take. Some were safer but longer, others were quicker but exposed. He seemed to weigh each option carefully, considering both risk and speed. The woman realized that survival was not just about courage. It was about making smart choices, about understanding the land and using it to their advantage. She nodded silently, trusting his judgment, knowing that their lives depended on the decisions they made now. They chose a path that led them through a dense thicket, where the tall grass and bushes provided cover. The woman moved quietly, following the cowboy's lead. Her muscles ached, and her stomach growled with hunger, but she pushed herself forward. The forest was quieter here, but she could still hear distant sounds, the rush of a stream, the call of a bird, and faint rustling that could be wolves or other creatures. Every sound made her tense, but the cowboy's steady presence helped her stay calm. Suddenly, a sharp noise broke the stillness, a branch snapping nearby. The woman froze, her heart pounding. The cowboy crouched low, signaling her to do the same. They waited, barely breathing. From behind a tree, a small group of wolves emerged, their eyes glowing in the dappled sunlight. They moved slowly, circling, sniffing the air. The woman's pulse quickened, but the cowboy did not panic. He whispered, though she could barely hear him, "Stay calm, don't run." The wolves were clever, but the cowboy had a plan. He picked up a few stones and tossed them carefully into a distant bush, creating a sound that drew the wolves away from their path. The wolves, curious, moved toward the noise, giving the pair a chance to slip past. The woman followed closely, her body tense and ready to react if needed. Each step was deliberate, measured, and silent. When they finally cleared the danger, she allowed herself a small sigh of relief. The forest was still full of threats, but they had survived another test. As the afternoon wore on, the forest began to thin, and the terrain became more uneven. They crossed shallow streams, climbed over fallen logs, and navigated around thorny bushes. The woman's body was tired, but her spirit was stronger than ever. She realized that survival was as much about mental strength as physical endurance. Each obstacle they overcame gave her confidence. She began to anticipate the cowboy's movements, learning from his experience and understanding the rhythms of the wilderness. Around late afternoon, they reached a ridge overlooking a valley. The view was breathtaking, but the woman's attention was caught by movement below. A small group of humans, perhaps hunters or soldiers, was moving through the valley, unaware of their presence on the ridge. The cowboy studied them carefully, calculating the safest route to avoid detection. He whispered for the woman to follow his lead, and together they moved along the ridge, using rocks and trees as cover. The tension was high, but each step brought them closer to safety. Night approached, and the pair needed to find shelter before darkness made travel impossible. The cowboy spotted a small cave hidden by rocks and thick foliage. It was not comfortable, but it offered protection from the wind and potential predators. They entered carefully, ensuring that no signs of their presence were visible. Inside, they settled down, building a small fire at a safe distance. The warmth and light were comforting, but the woman could still hear the distant howls of wolves, reminding her that danger was never far away. Sitting by the fire, the woman reflected on the day's journey. She had faced wolves, harsh terrain, and the constant threat of human danger. Yet she had survived each challenge, thanks to her courage, determination, and the guidance of the cowboy. She realized that survival was not just about strength. It was about patience, observation, and trust. She looked at the cowboy and silently thanked him, understanding that his presence had made the impossible possible. As night deepened, the forest grew quiet again, except for the distant calls of nocturnal animals. The woman lay down on a bed of leaves, her body exhausted but her mind alert. She knew that tomorrow would bring new challenges, but she also knew that they could face them together. The bond of trust between them had grown stronger, and she felt a sense of hope that she had not felt since before her capture. Before closing her eyes, she whispered a promise to herself. She would survive. She would face every danger, every challenge with courage and determination. And she would honor the bravery of the man who had refused to leave her behind, who had risked everything to save her life. The forest was dark and full of shadows, but in that darkness, hope burned brighter than any fear. The night was long and restless. The Apache woman lay awake for hours, listening to the soft sounds of the forest around them. The distant howls of wolves echoed through the trees, reminding her that danger was always near. She shifted slightly, careful not to disturb the cowboy, who had been keeping a quiet watch near the small fire. Though he appeared calm, she could sense his alertness. Every movement, every sound seemed to be analyzed, calculated, and prepared for. She realized that he was not just protecting her. He was teaching her how to survive in a world that was unpredictable and harsh. As dawn approached, the sky slowly lightened, and the first rays of sunlight touched the forest floor. The cowboy stirred, moving quietly to check their surroundings. He gestured for the woman to follow him, and they began their journey again. The forest was dense, with uneven terrain, fallen branches, and hidden roots that could trip them if they were not careful. The woman moved with growing confidence, observing the way the cowboy navigated the wilderness. She noticed how he used small rocks to test the ground, how he listened for distant sounds, and how he avoided open spaces where they could be seen. Each step was a lesson, and she absorbed it all with determination. They had not gone far when they noticed fresh footprints in the soft earth. The cowboy knelt to study them, his fingers tracing the patterns carefully. The footprints were human and they were close. He motioned for the woman to crouch and stay silent. They moved cautiously along a hidden path, keeping out of sight of the people who were following. The woman's heart pounded as she realized the danger was not just from animals anymore. Humans could be unpredictable, cruel, and relentless. She tightened her grip on the small bundle she carried, feeling a mix of fear and resolve. The forest opened into a narrow valley, where the sound of rushing water filled the air. A small river flowed through, its surface sparkling in the early morning light. The cowboy gestured for the woman to follow him down the slope carefully. They moved slowly, avoiding loose stones and slippery mud. Halfway down, the sound of voices reached them again. The woman froze, her heart racing. The cowboy raised a hand, signaling her to stay low. Peering through the bushes, they saw a small group of men crossing the river. The men were armed and alert, scanning the forest as they moved. The cowboy whispered, "We must stay hidden and move quietly." The woman followed his lead, crouching low and moving with deliberate, silent steps. The men in the valley passed without noticing them, but the tension remained high. Every branch that snapped, every leaf that rustled, felt like it could give away their position. The woman's muscles ached from the long journey, but she refused to stop. Survival depended on patience, alertness, and trust in each other. The cowboy's calm guidance helped her focus, and together they moved past the hidden dangers of the valley. By midday, the forest began to thin, and the terrain became more rugged. Rocky slopes and fallen logs slowed their progress, but the view opened up, allowing them to see further ahead. The woman spotted a small hill in the distance, partially covered by trees. The cowboy pointed toward it, signaling that it could offer temporary safety. They climbed carefully, using the rocks and roots as handholds. The sun was high, casting sharp shadows, and the heat made the climb exhausting. Yet each step brought them closer to a place where they could rest and plan the next part of their journey. Reaching the hill, they found a small cave hidden by rocks and brush. It was not large, but it offered protection from the wind, sun, and any wandering predators. The cowboy built a small fire at a safe distance, and they both ate a meager meal of dried meat and roots. The woman felt her strength returning, though she knew they could not stay here for long. Danger was still present, and the forest held more challenges ahead. She observed the cowboy as he checked the perimeter, noting his careful attention to detail. Every action was deliberate, every movement calculated to ensure their safety. As they rested, the woman began to speak quietly, sharing stories of her life before the capture. She told the cowboy about her village, her family, and the traditions of her people. The cowboy listened attentively, nodding occasionally, his eyes thoughtful. Though he did not share much about himself, his attention and presence offered comfort. The woman realized that survival was not just about avoiding danger. It was also about maintaining hope, remembering life beyond fear, and finding connection even in the darkest moments. The afternoon passed slowly, and the forest grew quieter as the sun began to dip toward the horizon. The cowboy gestured for them to prepare to move again, sensing that lingering too long could be dangerous. They packed their small belongings and left the cave carefully, moving along a narrow trail that wound through the rocks. The woman's muscles ached, and her feet were sore from the long journey, but she felt stronger than before. Each obstacle they overcame was a reminder of her resilience and courage. As evening approached, the forest became shadowed and mysterious. The light dimmed, and the sounds of nocturnal creatures began to fill the air. The woman shivered slightly, feeling the cool breeze on her face, but the cowboy offered her his scarf, which she accepted gratefully. They moved cautiously, stepping over fallen branches and around hidden rocks. The forest seemed alive with unseen eyes, and every sound heightened their alertness. The woman's heart raced, but she focused on the cowboy's steady presence, drawing strength from his calmness and experience. Suddenly, a rustle came from the bushes nearby. The woman froze, her breath catching in her throat. The cowboy raised a hand, signaling her to stay still. Out of the shadows emerged a small pack of wolves, their eyes glowing in the dim light. The animals circled cautiously, sniffing the air, clearly aware of their presence. The woman's heart pounded, but the cowboy remained calm. He picked up a few stones and threw them gently toward the opposite side of the clearing. The wolves, curious and cautious, moved toward the noise, giving them a chance to slip past. The woman followed closely, her movements deliberate and silent. After they cleared the immediate danger, the woman allowed herself a small sigh of relief. She realized that the forest was full of tests, but she was learning how to face each challenge. The cowboy's guidance, his calmness, and his cleverness were teaching her skills she never knew she had. Every obstacle, every moment of danger was a lesson in patience, courage, and trust. She felt a growing bond with the man who had saved her life, understanding that survival depended on their cooperation and shared determination. Night fell fully, and they reached a small clearing near a gentle stream. The sound of flowing water was soothing, but the woman knew it could also attract attention. They moved quietly to a hidden spot beneath the trees and built a small, safe fire. The warmth and light offered comfort, but the woman remained alert, her eyes scanning the darkness. The cowboy kept watch, scanning the horizon and listening for any signs of danger. She realized that their survival depended not only on courage but on vigilance, awareness, and quick thinking. Sitting by the fire, the woman reflected on the events of the day. They had faced human threats, wolves, and the harsh terrain of the forest. Yet, they had survived each challenge through careful planning, courage, and trust in each other. She felt a sense of accomplishment and hope that she had not felt since before her capture. The journey ahead would still be difficult, but she knew they could face it together. As the fire crackled softly, the woman lay down on a bed of leaves, exhausted but determined. She whispered a silent promise to herself: she would survive. She would face every challenge, every danger, with courage and patience. And she would honor the bravery of the cowboy who had refused to leave her behind, who had risked everything to save her life. The forest was dark, full of shadows and hidden threats, but in that darkness, hope burned brightly, stronger than any fear. The first light of dawn painted the forest in soft shades of gold and green. The Apache woman awoke to the sound of birds singing and the gentle rustle of leaves in the morning breeze. Her body ached from the long journey, but her spirit felt stronger than ever. Beside her, the cowboy had already begun to check the surrounding area, moving quietly yet confidently, as if the forest itself obeyed his careful watch. She admired his calmness and skill, understanding that the final steps of their escape would be just as dangerous as the first. Yet, for the first time in days, hope felt real and close. They moved carefully through the forest, using every shadow and tree for cover. The woman's eyes were sharp now, trained by the lessons of the past days. She noticed the signs of predators, the subtle changes in the ground that indicated others had passed, and the safest paths over rough terrain. The cowboy led the way, always alert, always measuring risk. He gestured silently, showing her the path along a narrow ridge that would keep them out of sight of any humans below. Step by step, they climbed higher, the morning sun warming their backs and illuminating the valley ahead. As they reached the top of the ridge, a breathtaking view opened before them. The valley stretched out like a green carpet, dotted with trees, streams, and patches of open land. In the distance, she could see the smoke of a small settlement rising above the treetops. Her heart leapt. Safety was near. The cowboy scanned the horizon carefully, calculating the best route down to the settlement without attracting attention. He pointed toward a hidden path along the edge of the valley, showing her the safest way forward. She nodded, filled with determination to reach the end of their journey. The descent was difficult. Loose rocks, hidden roots, and uneven ground made every step dangerous. The woman slipped a few times, but the cowboy was always there to steady her, guiding her with patient hands and calm words. She realized that she was no longer the frightened woman who had been tied to a tree days ago. She had learned to move quietly, to watch for danger, and to trust in both her courage and the guidance of someone who knew the land. Each careful step brought them closer to freedom, and her heart swelled with hope. As they neared the base of the valley, they could hear the sounds of life from the settlement. Voices, animals, and the faint clang of tools carried through the air. The woman's pulse quickened. They had survived wolves, treacherous terrain, and human threats. Now they faced the final challenge, reaching safety without drawing attention. The cowboy moved ahead carefully, using the cover of trees and bushes, and signaled for her to follow. Every movement was deliberate, measured, and silent. She followed closely, her senses sharp and her mind focused. Halfway to the settlement, a small group of men appeared in the clearing below. They seemed to be heading in the opposite direction, unaware of the pair moving quietly along the hidden path. The woman froze, her heart racing. The cowboy crouched low beside her, signaling patience. They waited as the men passed, their presence a tense reminder of how fragile safety could be. Once the path was clear, they continued, moving with renewed urgency yet careful to remain unseen. Finally, they reached the edge of the settlement. Smoke rose from small chimneys, and the sounds of people going about their day filled the air. The woman's heart soared. She had survived the forest, the wolves, and the dangers of pursuit. She looked at the cowboy, a silent understanding passing between them. They had come so far, and now the end of the journey was within reach. The cowboy led her through a hidden side path, keeping them out of sight until they were safely inside the settlement. Friendly faces greeted them, offering water, food, and shelter. The woman felt a wave of relief wash over her. She drank deeply, feeling life return to her tired body. She realized that every step, every decision, every moment of courage had led her to this place of safety. She turned to the cowboy, gratitude shining in her eyes, knowing that without his help, she might never have reached this moment. Over the next few days, she regained her strength and began to share her story with the people in the settlement. She spoke of her capture, the terrifying hours tied in the forest, and the wolves that had circled nearby. She told of the long journey through the wilderness, the dangers they had faced, and the courage that had carried them through. Her listeners were amazed by her bravery and resilience, but she never forgot to mention the cowboy who had saved her life. She spoke of his calmness, his cleverness, and his unwavering determination to ensure her survival. The cowboy, quiet as ever, stayed nearby. He did not seek recognition or praise, but the woman made sure everyone understood that he had been her protector, her guide, and her companion through the darkest moments. She knew that courage was not just about facing danger. It was also about helping others, about standing firm when someone's life depended on you. His bravery had been a light in the darkness, guiding her through the forest and showing her that hope could survive even in the most desperate situations. As the days passed, she thought about her family and her village. She longed to return, to share her survival and the lessons she had learned. She knew that she had changed, her courage had grown, her understanding of the world had deepened, and her appreciation for trust and kindness had strengthened. She had faced danger and fear, and she had survived. But more importantly, she had learned that courage and compassion could come from unexpected places, that even in the darkest moments, hope could shine brightly. The cowboy eventually prepared to leave the settlement, his journey taking him elsewhere. The woman stood by the edge of the village, watching him mount his horse. She felt a deep sense of gratitude and respect. He had risked his life to save hers, and in doing so, he had taught her the true meaning of courage and compassion. She waved silently as he rode away, disappearing into the forest that had once been so threatening, but now seemed less frightening with hope restored. Alone for the first time in days, the woman felt a sense of peace she had not known since before her capture. She walked through the village, feeling the warmth of safety, the comfort of food and shelter, and the kindness of people who had welcomed her without judgment. She realized that life could be harsh and unpredictable, but it could also be filled with acts of bravery, kindness, and hope. Her journey through the wilderness had tested her in every way, but it had also shown her the strength of her own spirit and the power of trust and courage. That evening, she sat by the river that ran through the village, watching the sun set behind the mountains. The water reflected the soft colors of the sky, and she felt a deep sense of gratitude for the life she had reclaimed. She thought of the cowboy, of the dangers they had faced, and of the wolves that had circled them in the forest. She understood that survival was never guaranteed, but courage, cleverness, and trust could make all the difference. She whispered a silent promise to herself. She would live fully, with strength, compassion, and hope, honoring the lessons she had learned and the bravery of the man who had saved her life. As night fell, the village quieted, and the stars appeared above. The Apache woman looked up, feeling a sense of connection to the world around her. She had survived the wilderness, she had faced danger, and she had found safety. Her heart was filled with gratitude, her mind with the memories of courage and trust, and her spirit with a determination to live fully. She knew that life would continue to challenge her, but she also knew that she had the strength to face whatever came next. In the quiet of the night, with the river gently flowing and the stars shining above, she closed her eyes with a sense of peace. She had been captured, left for predators, and faced dangers beyond imagining. Yet she had survived, thanks to her courage, her resilience, and the man who had refused to leave her behind. The forest had tested her, the wolves had threatened her, and the humans had hunted her, but she had emerged stronger, wiser, and full of hope. She whispered softly, a final promise to herself and to the world. She would never forget the journey, the lessons, and the bravery that had saved her life. And she would live, not just to survive, but to honor the courage that had guided her through the darkness and into the light of safety.